Welcome to the 529 podcast, where we dive into the exciting world of startups and side hustles and chat with fascinating entrepreneurs about their experiences and insights. I am your host, Nathan Hantla, and today we have Jay Manier, who is a former director of operations at KPMG and gained the passion for helping startup companies succeed. Today, Jay tells us his story of how it all began, then dives into depth about the most important things startups can do to succeed. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Howdy, Jay. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thanks very much for inviting me. Looking forward to a very exciting session with you guys.
Yeah, us as well. So let's just get started. How would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So mine has been like a very unusual path to finance and operations. I actually had dreams of becoming a commercial pilot, and life has its twists and turns, and I found myself navigating financial clouds instead of, literal ones. And what I'd say is, I think flying has kind of taught me, because I was thinking about becoming a commercial pilot, and then I sort of changed my mind and thought, actually, you know what? It's not really for me. I'd rather be doing something else. So I actually started to take private flying lessons. And I think that's what's taught me is precision, discipline, and really the need to stay cool under pressure. So when I did make the switch to finance, I think those skills really came in handy. Plus, I think I realized, the thrill that I was looking for wasn't limited to just being in the cockpit. I'm not going to say finance is an exciting career or anything, but it has its own adrenaline rush, especially when, steering businesses through challenges. So for me, shifting from flying to small businesses and startups, I think for me, it's all about the underdogs. Small businesses are the heartbeat of innovation, and I see there's an opportunity to kind of bring my financial know-how to the table and really help these ambitious people carve their path. It's about talking the language of numbers without making it sound like it's a foreign one, breaking down that sort of financial maze, making it digestible. And really, the other side of it is showing entrepreneurs the roadmap without drowning them in jargon. Numbers should be a tool. They shouldn't be a puzzle to scare people away.
You've been a coach and a mentor for a good amount of startup companies. How about you tell us a little bit about that?
So I've worked corporate level. I've worked for places like Iveco, the Italian vehicle company. I think maybe in the US you may not be too familiar with them, but they're the Italian company that holds brands like Fiat and Ferrari. I've also worked for places like Sanyo, and my last role was as director of operations at KPMG. So working in the Middle East, doing a lot of digital transformation work. But I think for me, the fun and the excitement has really been about working with startups and helping them get funded, work on their investment models, pitch decks, financial models, and so on, and help them to navigate a decent financing deal and so on, all the way to, like traditional businesses and who would just need to have a proper understanding of their numbers in order to, be as profitable as possible. So I used to run drop-in business clinics where business owners who are thinking about starting a business, I'd sort of walk them through some of their sort of strategies, maybe have a look at their business models and see where they could be improved, or if they were going to go for funding or anything like that, get them funding ready, really. So it's been sort of a varied journey, but yeah, small businesses, I think, is where my heart lies.
And when you're working with these startup companies and kind of helping them with their funding or just kind of their biggest problems, like what do you find being their biggest problem that they have?
I'd say it's the value proposition. I think when it comes to startups and scale-ups, the financial hurdles are always going to be there. First up, things like cash flow, it's the lifeblood. You've got to manage it carefully. Then you've got the dance with the investors. Getting funding is exciting, absolutely, but it comes with its own set of moves, and balancing growth ambitions with investor expectations, and that can be a bit of a challenge. And then you've got innovation. And I think innovation for me is the wild card. You've got to foster it, but innovation costs money. And it's about finding that sweet spot where financial stability and creative freedom can work together. And just coming back to the value proposition, for me, I think that is the secret sauce. I don't know if you're listeners or if you've come across this tool called the Business Model Canvas. And it's something that I push on everybody who's thinking about starting a business. I think it's one of the best planning tools out there. And what it kind of does is it helps you figure out, what your value proposition is. And on the right-hand side, there's a whole bunch of boxes, and it's all about how you're going to reach out to your customers, who they are, what kind of messaging is going to work with them. And then on the left-hand side, it's what your assets are, what sort of structure do you have, what your costs are, who are you going to partner with, things like that. Whenever I start this exercise and I look at the value proposition, I always put, would you buy your own products and services? Because that has got to be so overarching over everything else. And yes, the value proposition says, okay, that's what's going to set my business apart. But it also says you need us. And that's what you kind of really got to get your head around. So it's not just about what you're selling. It's about the magic that you bring to the customers, your clients. And you've really got to answer that question, why do I want to choose you over the others? And that in the essence is your business, right? And why is it so important? Because whenever I've run these sessions with businesses, what normally happens is you work on what you think your value proposition is. Then you're going to work on your customers, your customer segments. Very often what happens is you'll start to brainstorm and you'll start to see, actually, my original, sort of customers that I had in my mind, I'm actually able to reach out to a whole bunch of new customers that I hadn't even thought about originally. And that's going to take you back to your value proposition and you think, you know what, do I need to change that? Do I need to be a bit more agile about my messaging? I don't want to restrict myself as to what I'm offering. So it's not just about your features, it's about whispering the benefits as well. And then a really clear value proposition is like the North Star that guides your marketing, your messaging, and even your product development. It's the compass that's going to keep you on course when things go wrong, and things are inevitably going to go wrong. So for me, it's the heartbeat of your success. Mike Tyson, there's that classic quote of his, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And, as a business owner, when the marketing plan falls flat, clients aren't knocking on your door, your revenue hits a plateau, that's the punch in the face. So what's the move? What do you do? And I think that's where your value proposition kind of steps back in, in the midst of your storm. It's a reminder of what makes you awesome. When everything seems to be going wrong, like Tyson, take a step back, regroup, remember your strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. I can 100% agree with that. I think whenever, you take that punch, something that's extremely important is knowing your value proposition, what makes you different from your competition, and also kind of just being passionate about that to make sure, taking those hits, you're actually going to want to get back up and keep fighting. So absolutely. Let's kind of dig a little bit into your past a little bit more. What would you say was one of the scariest times you've had dealing with these startup companies? Were there any times you were kind of worried this wasn't going to work out at all and then you kind of pulled through?
Yeah. There's, without sort of breaching confidentiality, there's a couple of startups that I'm advising at the moment where they thought they had investors ready and lined up, and at the very last minute, they've all pulled out. So they're now looking at the very, very awful situation where they're thinking, well, we're going to have to close everything up and, liquidate. So right now we're sort of working on a battle strategy to find some emergency investors, but we're also looking at a couple of debt options just to keep the lights on and just get a bit more traction going, so that the proposition to reach out to new investors is a hell of a lot more than sort of like a desperate, oh my God, we need funds, can you please help us?
So kind of, I guess, digging a bit deeper into that, equity or debt, which route do you think someone should take when they're starting up? And are there reasons you should go one way or the other, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, really good question. I think trying to figure out whether you take debt or equity just depends on obviously a couple of factors, and obviously the company's growth stage as well. I think you need to have a look at what industry you're operating in and really what kind of risk appetite you have, as well as either the equity investors or whether you're looking at banks or other financial institutions. While equity provides the flexibility, I think debt offers leverage. And I think it's trying to find the right balance between the two and aligning that with your company's goals and really the financial health. I think obviously both debt and equity have their challenges. And one of the things I've seen over and over again, we've all gone down this entrepreneurial path because either we've seen an opportunity in the marketplace or there's other things at play. One of the things that was important to me, and I know it's important to quite a few others, is just being in control of your own destiny, captain of your own ship, whichever phrase you want to use. And having debt means having full control of your business. But obviously you need to be very careful of overburdening your balance sheet. You don't want to be too highly geared, too highly leveraged, because that's going to make future investments difficult. And anyone who's doing any kind of due diligence on you, they're going to be looking at your balance sheet and, trying to figure out, what's the health of your business. But then equity, yes, it's exciting to have a venture capitalist on board or an angel investor, but it means that an investor is now calling the shots. And you have the issue whereby you think you're controlling the business and you want to operate in a certain strategy, you want to do things in a certain way, but now you've got to get clearance from your investor because ultimately they're the ones holding the purse string. Then you've got issues around cap table dilution and employee share options. And if you haven't hit performance targets, there's things called, a down round. So, if you've raised something like seed funding and you're thinking, okay, we've raised $500,000 in seed funding, we want to go for a Series A raise of, a couple of million, but your growth has been sort of mediocre. The chances of you getting that 1.5 million, 2 million, Series A funding is going to be exceptionally difficult. And now your investors who are sitting on at seed level are now thinking, well, not very happy with your performance, and you're now going to either have to give me extra equity or you're going to need to raise your performance massively and give me a higher return on my investment. So I think, coming back to the question, it really depends on what stage you're at. I would always advocate going with debt at the very early stages because it just gives you a bit more control. And once you've demonstrated traction, it's much easier to negotiate from a position of strength with investors. So you're not giving away massive equity for peanuts.
Yeah, absolutely. And dealing with the whole debt and equity structure, you had mentioned it's kind of also a bit industry based. What industries do you find best benefit from debt? One's kind of best benefit from equity?
Let's say you're drop shipping, or you got a product or something that you're reselling. I think you're better off using debt for that. If you're developing some kind of SaaS model, I think you're better off getting equity there because the development time and time to market are just so long. You need to have the funding in place. And very often trying to get debt funding, it's usually going to be based on, well, okay, what sort of assets can I secure this funding on? And very often, you have zero assets because you're just starting out.
Do you find someone with a certain mindset or certain personality to be more successful than other people?
It's yes and no. I think mindset covers sort of a range of issues. I mean, firstly, I'm always going to ask, do you have like a clear vision and passion about what it is you're doing? Does this just look like a sort of a fast, I'm going to make some money and get the hell out? Those sorts of characters I'm really not interested in because they're going to cut corners. They're not really going to listen to advice and they're just going to be in it for a quick buck and get out. So having that clear vision, I think, is sort of the first thing I'll be looking for. Then when they sort of explain what their concept actually is, I'll actually ask, well, have you actually done a proper market research? Yeah, are you familiar with the total addressable market, service addressable market, and service operational? And for those of you who may not know, it's really just understanding what the size of your market is and then sort of breaking it down into, okay, out of people who are interested in pizza, the pizza market is 7.8 billion or something like that. But the number of people who want to have a baked in a Firestone oven is only sort of 40% of that. And of that, I'm going to go for my immediate area. I'm going to try and get my service obtainable market is going to be a sort of 5% of that 40%. When you see that someone's done that kind of research and really understood what their market sizing is, that for me is a green flag. That tells me, okay, you do have a grasp of what the industry landscape looks like. And it just shows that you're prepared. And then when you kind of roll that into the financial preparedness, and do you even have a realistic financial plan? That's the next thing. Do you understand what your break-evens are? Do you understand what the profitability around these products or services that you're thinking about operating in? What are the projected expenses? Have you done any kind of sensitivity analysis on worst-case scenarios, best-case scenarios? And what happens if there is any kind of funding delay, or like with the organizations I'm working with, what happens in a worst-case scenario where your investor pulls out? How long can you stay alive for? And again, this is where mindset really does come in, because as an entrepreneur, business owner, you've got to be adaptable. adaptable. You've got to have a very high risk tolerance. So if you're the type who is going to sort of spiral when things go wrong, then this really isn't for you. You've really just got to think about having a career, because things are going to go wrong. And startups, more than any others, they're going to face unexpected challenges, and they've just got to be so adaptable and comfortable with that level of uncertainty. And one of the words I've always used, and this is the reason why I've kind of called my consultancy, pivotal. It's that willingness to pivot when things are going horrifically wrong. It's recognizing what the market's kind of telling you and saying, actually, my original plan is not going to work, but from what I've learned, I can see another avenue. I can see another way to move forward. And really, it's understanding that if I can see these kinds of characteristics within somebody sort of approaching me for advice, that's when I know you stand a pretty good chance of succeeding. And I think finally, it's being able to answer, can you pass the why now test? Can you articulate why now is the right time for your startup? I think understanding the market trends, being able to explain why their solution is timely, just adds another layer of a readiness. So with friends and family and so on. And it's great if you have that kind of relationship where you communicate very, very openly. I have always said that having a co-founder is a bigger commitment than marriage. You need to be able to communicate better than with your spouse or your significant other, because when things go wrong or just get incredibly difficult, and they will, you're going to be tested to emotional and communication limits that you just didn't think were possible. And it's very hard to set boundaries with friends and family because they're your friends. You just think they know what they're doing. You shouldn't really have to explain things to them. But no, that's very often not how it happens. You kind of let things slide because you just think, he's my friend, he should be okay, and we'll figure that out. And very often that's when things get really fractious. This is where legal issues fire up for no reason at all. When you're working with somebody who's a complete stranger to you, it's so much easier to sort of say, okay, here's the boundary, here's the structure that we're working towards. You know exactly where you stand, I know exactly where I stand, and it's just so much easier to manage. And just speaking from my own personal experiences, I did a startup years back in 2007. One of my old managers, he sort of reached out to me and we started up this little sort of consultancy. And where we had a sort of a proper working relationship beforehand, it was very easy to understand where both of us, stood. Being together now, in this sort of completely different environment, that was so much more difficult, I'd say, because he had his skills and experiences, I had mine. But because of that sort of familiarity, it made that sort of demarcation between what he was working on, what I was working on, his opinions versus my opinions. It made it so much more difficult. So I'd say be very careful who you pick, establish the boundaries right from the get-go. And you know that sort of phrase where they say, hire slowly but fire fast. You've got to almost take that kind of approach, establish what's going on. And if things are going bad, you've got to have that full, frank, uncomfortable conversation very, very quickly.
Kind of wrapping back around to what you had mentioned earlier, why now? What would be a good time for a startup company? And more on that kind of question, is now a good time? If someone who's listening to this is interested in starting a company right now, is now a good time with kind of economic conditions and stuff going on? Or
Yeah. I think history's shown over and over again, it's usually during recessions and really challenging markets where some of the most innovative startups have sort of come onto the scene. I think coming back to, what I sort of said earlier, understanding what your value proposition, understanding the why now, and understanding what that market looks like and what you're able to offer, which is going to be so much more different. I think that is really going to determine whether now is the right time. It could be that you've got to spend some time developing the app or some software, or maybe develop the actual product itself. But I don't think there's an absolutely perfect time. I think it really does come down to those three sort of elements. If you can answer those and you have a clear sort of runway in terms of financing the development of your product or service, I think that is what you kind of need to be looking at before you decide, okay, let's press the button and go.
What's your second best piece of advice for someone who wanted to go and start up a company right now?
I think you've got to embrace adaptability. I think the entrepreneurial journey is one hell of a roller coaster. And I think being able to pivot and evolve with this sort of changing landscape, being adaptable just means being agile. And being agile means you're sort of maintaining your own emotions. And it sounds like in the world of business, emotions don't have a place. But, let's be realistic. If you're permanently feeling pessimistic about the whole thing, guess what? Your business is going to fail. So managing your own confidence, your own motivation, it's absolutely critical. So being adaptable, I think, is solid sort of characteristic that you absolutely need.
If someone was maybe trying to join a startup company, how can they kind of ensure that the company's values are what they are?
Again, it's like I was saying earlier, when you're talking to somebody and you realize they're in it for a quick buck, I think you've got to try and determine that very quickly from the get-go. That is a losing situation. You're going to be, if you're going to join an organization like that, just know you're going to get taken advantage of, and there's not going to be much payback for you. Whereas if you know that the founders talk passionately about the market that they're serving, and when you talk to them about the marketing, they have a very clear understanding of the people that they're trying to reach out to. That tells you that there is a lot more going on than just the quick profit. And that's when you know, okay, is this some kind of purpose-led business that I'm working with? Or again, are they just here to sell and dominate and then move on? When you know that the founder or the founding team also talk very similarly to each other, that's another green flag I've found over the years. That's when you know that the team are in sync. They have a very clear vision about what it is they're trying to achieve. And they're literally on the same page about how they're going to go about it. And I think that can be very reassuring. So okay, it's not a whole bunch of people trying to sort of create their own little empires within this business. They're all going to be working towards a single vision.
Where do you think would be the best exit strategy for startup companies? Or does it kind of depend on the person?
It depends not just on the person, but on the product, but also on the market itself. There are some products where, have you come across that term defensibility mode? It's that concept of just how easy is it for a competitor to come up with something similar or come in and really dominate the market that this company is operating in. If you know that what you have is a significant advantage over other companies, or over other even competitors who haven't even started, then it could be that you are a highly attractive acquisition target for, say, one of the bigger players. And you've also got to remember that a lot of competitive strategy could be just to literally buy you out and shelve you. So all of your work has just gone to nothing. Well, not literally nothing. I mean, obviously you're going to be sitting on a bit of a payout, but if you're there for anything other than cash, then looking at a buyout has really got to be considered very carefully. If the market, however, is so strong, it may be that an IPO is the best option for you, because not only can you sort of benefit from the work that you've already done, but you can continue to evolve the product, evolve the market, evolve how the company's operating within that market, and sort of really develop yourself as well as you grow. And then, it could be that the market situation is so challenging that you've got no option but to shut down. It really depends on where you're at and the market.
So why is a business plan important? And should they write it, or should they hire someone to write it? And what are kind of the important parts of these business plans that definitely need to be in there?
Yeah. I forget who coined this phrase. I think it goes something like, a battle plan never survives first contact with the enemy. And you could argue, well, what's the point of planning in that case? So the plan isn't there to sort of guide you step by step on what to do when things go wrong. It's really there to just help find your way in a fog, find your way in a storm. Because when you go back to your plan, sometimes you need to go back to it just to think, well, were my assumptions right? Did my expectations of the market, were they just completely out? Am I seeing that actually my product market fit just doesn't work? Is the product not quite right? Is the market not quite right? What do I need to go back to? And understanding what your plan was, I think, is crucial to understanding how you can fix things when things are going wrong. Whether you should do it yourself, I think you should always do it yourself to begin with, because understanding what your plan is has got to come back to you. That it's your responsibility as a founder. Getting assistance on it in various key areas, like, yes, of course, get a finance professional in to build what your financial model should be, where your break-evens are, what your profitability looks like, and so on. Of course, get that done. If you're confident with the numbers, then of course do it yourself. Same with marketing. Understanding what your sales and revenue forecasts are going to be, it can be really challenging to understand, where do I begin guessing what I can sell? And having somebody with an external sort of perspective that can sort of shortcut that whole guesswork and say, okay, I think this is a realistic number for you to begin with. And then as you execute and you sort of test and iterate, you can refine the plan as you go along. And what you're going to find is at the beginning, your plan is down here, real life reality is up here, but it will start to narrow as you get smarter, as you execute more, as you get more feedback. So try and do it by yourself in the first instance. Get as much of your take on your product, your service, and your customers, and then get in the help as you need it.
How important would you say it is for them to know their competition and their competitors?
Very, very important. Whenever I've done pitch decks, clients who've gone for investor funding, if you don't have a slide on your pitch deck which clearly outlines who your competitors are and all the features and benefits of their particular offering versus yours, no investor's going to touch you. They're really going to just say, you haven't done your homework. You don't understand what's out there. And quite frankly, you're kind of going in this blind, and that's a risk that no one's really willing to take. So from an investment perspective, you really got to know who your competition is. Just for your own perspective with this defensibility mode, you need to understand how far advanced your competition is. When you appear on the scene, they can very quickly see what you're doing. And if they've been established for a longer time than you have, then the chances are they've got a whole network, a whole framework that they can rely on, where they can literally take what you're doing and incorporate it into their own products and services and outcompete you before you've even got a chance to hit the ground. So get your competition, your competitor sweep. That's an exercise that I would absolutely get it done. Don't half-ass it. If you need to get some additional help around it, here in the UK, it's a government organization. It's called the British Library. And what you're able to do is you're able to access very expensive reports for free. And normally, if you wanted to find out what is the market size, what's the competition for, children's eco-friendly toys, you can download these reports for free and get the information you need. They normally cost around £10,000 or ridiculous sums of money. So if you have anything like that in the US, I would absolutely take advantage of it. Use it, get your competition, understand that information very, very, very clearly. Trying out your competitors' services, getting your friends and family to sign up to them and understand what their customer journey has been. By all means, do it, because you can bet they're doing it to you.
How can you better market your strengths? What's the best way to kind of show the customers, this is why we're different, this is why you should go with us and not them?
So coming back to the value proposition, one of the mistakes that I think a lot of people make is they sort of focus very much on features. And there's a concept called jobs to be done. And this is something I always try and hammer down as much as I can. When people are going out to buy a drill, they're not going to buy a drill. They want the hole. They want to hang up a picture or they want to do something. They don't care about the drill. And what a lot of founders do is they focus on the drill. It's a fantastic color. It's got this much power. It's got a 300-meter lead. The battery lasts for 3 years or something crazy like that. No one cares about that. Can it give me the hole I need? And can it do it quickly? And can it do it cleanly? That's it. That's all I want to know. And taking the time to understand what it is that your customers really, their pain points, what are the real pain points, taking the time to understand what that is, and then tracing it back to what you're about to offer, do that exercise. Again, that's absolutely critical.
Whenever startup companies begin, what's a good way for them to kind of determine their startup costs and other expenses?
To use an example from one of my recent clients, they started importing foods from across the globe. They had a sort of an idea on what the cost was going to be. The reality is shipping costs have now trebled. The cost of storage and things like that have just gone through the roof. And what they're finding is that what they originally thought was going to be a highly profitable venture has now turned into something that's just, look, if I can just break even, I'll be happy. So understanding what your products are going to cost and what your market is prepared to pay is one thing, but just know that is a moving target. It's always going to change.
We're kind of going to move on into a segment where we asked a survey from our audience, kind of questions they may have for you.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sharon H. asked, do you need HR? And I think the kind of question that she's getting around to here is, at what point do you recommend clients pursue HR-related employees?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think getting HR support in a startup, it really depends on the scale, growth stage, and the nature of the business. And I think obviously size and complexity is the first part. For very early stage startups with a small team, straightforward operations, I think a dedicated HR role is not really necessary. But as the team grows, especially beyond, like I said, sort of 15, 20 employees, the complexities arise, in areas like recruitment, employee relations, compliance. And I think that's when HR becomes a bit more relevant. And then, as I was sort of kind of alluding to before, when founders start to take on the CEO role, it's what is the culture and the employee dynamics that you kind of want to build into the business. As your startup grows, you want to start to hire the best around there. Now, at that sort of stage, the chances are you're not really going to be able to compete on a sort of a salary basis because you're either bootstrapped or you've got to make the investment runway last as long as possible. So offering top tier salaries is never going to work, but you can compete on culture. And if you know that you just don't have the time or you're not a people person, maybe outsource that, get the HR people in. But again, it just depends on how big you actually are. But I would not get somebody full-time in until you're about sort of the 20 employee mark.
Who do you recommend, or like what branch of the company do you recommend they kind of first start off hiring if they have absolutely no experience in anything besides maybe just the product itself? Do you recommend they hire like accounting first or the legal team or kind of all at once?
Great question. Okay, I'm going to be biased around this because my background is finance and operations. So I will always say finance. It's got to be your starting point because it's interesting. I was on another podcast and they said, if you were going to give one piece of advice, what would it be? And, if you could sum it up in just a couple of words, what would it be? And I sort of thought about it for a while and thought, know thyself. I think that has really got to be the crux of what you do. And know thyself translates into all kinds of things. But for me, it means know what you're selling, know your market, of course, know your value proposition, of course, but know your numbers. There's no point in spending all of your time, all of your effort, all of your finances in developing something which is going to be ultimately loss-making or is just going to be so difficult to get to market. It just reminds me of this awful story of somebody who went into the startup world, created a fantastic product, but hadn't really considered the effects of getting investors on board. They went down the equity route. They hadn't really managed their cap table properly. And ultimately, their shareholding was diluted to the point where I think they were going to sell the business for about 50 million or something. And I think they were barely going to make 200,000 from it based on the dilution. And I just thought, you spent all of that blood, sweat, and you sold your soul almost for 5 years of work. You're going to get 200,000. It's just not worth it. So understanding what your numbers are going to be and having that plan, I think, should be your first port of call. Then sort of moving on into sort of other areas. And here's where I'm going to use a bit of an analogy and using, Brothers Frontiers seems to be a great name. Sort of back in the old days of the US when it was sort of first growing and there was this sort of mad rush for gold, oil, and other precious assets. You'd find somebody who had found a gold seam or an oil well or coal or something else. And very quickly you'd have people selling shovels or selling food or beer and all that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden you've got this little campsite that's now turned into a town. And that's very much what a startup is. You've got this sort of loose collection of individuals who are really working hard on their specialist areas. And once you get to a certain point of growth, then bring in the equivalent of a sheriff. You need to have your chief of operations or a chief of staff or something like that, where the founder can stay focused on what they're good at, which is their product or the software that they're developing, and really let someone else focus on building the culture of the company. I think that's where a lot of founders kind of go wrong, because they sort of say, okay, well, I'm the founder, so I should be the CEO. But you know nothing about running a business as a CEO. You don't know about company culture. You don't know about how, compliance. And because that's not your area of expertise, it's not your area of interest. If you need to have HR, I would say don't bring HR in until you've got around sort of at least 15 to 20 people in the business. At that point, things are going to get complex and you really want to outsource that as quickly as possible. And when you do bring these experts in, use the fractional experts. I call myself a fractional CFO because you don't need me in your business full time. You just need the expertise on tap. Same for whether you're talking about CMO, legal, marketing, anything else. Get them on a fractional basis until you know for sure what it is you need.
So if someone wanted to use like a resource, maybe like a book or a course, is there anything you could recommend if they wanted to learn more about startup companies?
Yeah, so the main tool I use is the business model canvas, and I would highly recommend a book called Business Model Generation by, I think it's Eric Osterwalder, The Lean Startup. I think you must have heard of, by Ries. That's a great book. And, articles on platforms like Medium and following other influencers like, Gary Vaynerchuk, Seth Godin. I think Seth Godin's actually written quite a few really interesting marketing books, which even though they're sort of a little bit dated now, there's some nuggets of gold in there. Oh, and also a bit of a controversial one, but Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I think that's a really good book. And when everyone's talking about niching down and sort of being able to sort of control the market that you're operating in, there's some great insights in that book as well.
Thank you. That was perfect. If someone wanted to learn more about startup companies, or maybe even kind of wanting to do what you do and become a coach and mentor for startup companies, where could they reach you?
Yeah, reach me on LinkedIn. You can easily find me on there, or email me, j@pivotal.co.uk. I'm happy to provide complimentary strategy discussions.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for coming on today, Jay. Really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode, then get excited, because we have more content just like that coming out soon. If you just can't wait, then make sure to check out our YouTube Reels and Instagram story, where we'll be giving away some juicy bits of future episodes. If you're not already, make sure to follow us on all of our socials, including Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram, and tune in every Tuesday for more episodes. Thank you for listening, and enjoy your 529. Later, folks.